Good. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to give a little talk, drawing on some of the ideas from that Bible reading there. I've got an idea how long it's going to last, but what I generally find is if I tell you how long a talk's going to last, it always lasts about 5 minutes longer than I thought, and then you'll all ask for your money back. So I'm not going to tell you, but not very long. Not very long. There's coffee and iced buns coming soon. My name's James. You heard Sarah referring to me earlier, so I'm the one with the noisy guitar. But now some things to say too. Why don't we continue in prayer just a moment longer? Loving God, help us have our ears and our minds and our hearts open to anything you might want to speak to us now. Come and be present with us, we pray. Amen. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit about me at primary school. Actually, not really about me, about somebody else at primary school. When I was maybe 7 or 8, something like that, I remember this girl in my primary school, and she wasn't there the whole way through my school life. She was maybe there for a year or a bit longer. And she was unusual. She was different from the rest of the children in my class. I think in hindsight, I didn't know this at the time, but she probably had some kind of learning disability. We didn't give it that word at the time. She was very, very loud, very lively, very much in your face all the time. She danced a lot. She laughed a lot. She got told off a lot. You got the impression the teachers weren't particularly fond of her, to be honest. And actually neither were the rest of us. We ignored her. She didn't have any friends at school. We didn't talk to her. We just let her get on with her own thing. And in fact, to be honest, we kept her at a distance. I think maybe she wasn't always very clean as well. I think maybe she wasn't very well cared for. And we excluded her. We ostracized her. I remember one day walking home from school, and I was waiting at the lights, the pedestrian lights, waiting for the green man. This is on Hewlett Road in Cheltenham, if you've been there. The green man is the pedestrian lights. Not the green man isn't the name of the pub, because I was only 7 or 8, waiting for the green man so I could cross the road. And this girl from my class runs up behind me, gets very close to me, because she was always very close, giggling. She was always giggling, always noisy. And she gave me a wagon wheel. Or at least she held out a wagon wheel for me to take. Now, I was at school a long time ago, but I do mean a small biscuit wrapped in chocolate rather than the wheel of a wagon. She offered me this wagon wheel. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, was it okay to take this thing? Do you know, we never sort of said it out loud, I don't think, but no, we probably did. We probably did talk about her out loud in class. We probably did say nasty things about her. I just don't remember. But certainly there's this unspoken thing. You don't have anything to do with her. So now she's offering me a wagon wheel. Can I take it? I did take the wagon wheel. You know, for me, maybe this is your experience as well, the most exciting thing ever in my lunchbox was a homemade flapjack. And so, you know, anything in chocolate in its own wrapper is pretty remarkable. And I mean now, don't years change things for you? Now I realise my mum's homemade flapjack is far better than the wagon wheel. But anyway, then this felt like a significant gift to me. So I took the wagon wheel. I probably said thank you. We walked some of the way home together, and I chatted to her for the first time ever, and I'm sorry to say for the last time ever as well. I was polite while I'd received this gift, but it didn't change my behaviour towards her after that. I think that's probably not an unusual story, is it? I guess you've probably got similar stories yourselves. You know, similar things that happen to you maybe at school, maybe similar things that are happening to you now, maybe in your workplace or your family or whatever. That, you know, humanity, we have this tendency to try to ostracize, not to try, we do it, to ostracize people, to keep people away from us. We want to get ourselves into groups of people like us, and we keep others different from us. And not only do we do that, not only do we ostracize people, I think we run the risk of missing the gifts that they bring into the world because we keep ourselves separate from them. The reading in the Bible, I think, is about that, as Sarah's already talked about some of it this morning already, about Jesus going to the people who are ostracized, Jesus going to the people who are considered beyond the pale, and also about these other people who got upset about him. So from that passage in the Bible, there's 5 things I want to say briefly. Two weird things that Jesus does. 2 weird things that Jesus does, and then I've run out of fingers. I need to start somewhere else. 2 weird things that Jesus does, and then 3 weird things that Jesus says. 2 weird things that Jesus does, and then 3 weird things that Jesus says. And the first weird thing he does is he goes to Matthew, the tax collector, and he says, "Follow me. Come and be part of my life. Learn from me." Now, tax collectors were deeply, deeply hated. Not in the way that we think about our taxes and we feel annoyed about it. Much, much worse than that. Because the tax collectors worked for the Romans, and the Romans were the occupying force in Israel at the time. Okay? So to be a tax collector, you were pretty much a traitor because you were colluding with the occupying force. So if you imagine, maybe in 1940s England, imagine that a Nazi invasion had happened and was successful and they were ruling our country, and some of your neighbours were saying, "Oh, actually, I can make some money out of this. I'm going to go and work for them." It's like that, okay? So tax collectors were really, really hated. And yet Jesus goes and finds Matthew, sat at his desk, jotting down with his quill and his goat skin, whatever he had, instead of pen and paper, jotting down what people owed, what they'd paid. And yet Jesus goes to him and says, "Hey, there's room for you with me. Come and be part of my group. Come and be part of my community. Come and learn from me." And then we're introduced just a moment later to these people called the Pharisees. And they are very unhappy about what Jesus is doing, not just hanging out with this one tax collector, but then we find Jesus at this dinner party, and he's invited lots of tax collectors and these other people called sinners. And the Pharisees are not happy. The Pharisees, they're the self-appointed moral police, okay? They're the ones who maintain all of the boundaries in the society. They make sure that everybody is obeying by all of the right rules, okay? In fact, the name Pharisee comes from the Semitic languages. Hebrew is a Semitic language, or Aramaic, they might have been speaking Semitic language. The word Pharisee means separated ones, okay? So the Pharisees are the separatists, and you can have another syllable in there if you like. The Pharisees are the separatists. They are the ones who want to make sure that decent people stay away from those dodgy people. They're the ones who want to make sure that their in-group stays pure enough. They're the ones who surround themselves with people who think and do exactly the same as them, because that's how they feel safest. That's the way they should be in the world. Okay? You've got these Pharisees, the separatists. But Jesus is not a separatist. Again and again in the Bible, this isn't the only story. Jesus goes to those who are considered outsiders, who are considered beyond the pale, and he befriends them. He invests care in them. He spends time with them. Jesus is just oblivious to all of society's boundary lines. And again, he transgresses them. He breaks them. He goes to the people he's not supposed to go to. He breaks the taboos. Again and again, he includes people. He welcomes people, even the most ostracized people. Let's just pause for a moment, because Leslie told me what the sign for ostracized is, and it's genius. Would you like to see it? Isn't that great? Do you know, you might not remember anything I said, but remember that. There's an in-group. There's one person. They've been taken away. Ostracized. Jesus just delighted in building relationship with those who were considered beyond the pale. In fact, it seems to me Jesus was almost playful with it, with the way that he did it, shocking people. And he didn't waste very much time with respectful people. Well-behaved people, we might consider as middle-class people. He didn't really spend that long with them. And here we are 2,000 years later. I still find what Jesus does absolutely shocking. And I think maybe we get too familiar with this man and what he did and what he said. But let's feel afresh again the shock of somebody who broke all of those rules and just embraced people who were considered beyond the pale, who were outsiders, who were ostracized, who were tax collectors and sinners. The first weird thing Jesus does is he calls Matthew, this tax collector, to be his disciple. The second weird thing is he creates community out of these ragtag misfits, out of these morally questionable people. And the separatists come and they challenge him through his disciples. And then Jesus says these three weird things. Did you hear them? The first one he said was, the thing is, guys, I'm paraphrasing. The thing is, guys, it's the sick who need a doctor. That's the first thing. It's the sick who need a doctor. The second thing is, he said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And then the third weird thing, he says, I came to call sinners, not the righteous. The middle one, I require mercy, not sacrifice, is a quote from the Old Testament part of the Bible. It's a quote from the book of Hosea. Hosea was a prophet. So prophets in the Old Testament, they presume to speak for God. Okay, so the words, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, it's like they're coming from God. Jesus also sometimes speaks for God, doesn't he? But here he's quoting somebody else speaking for God. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I think what this is about is that way that humanity, again and again, we tie ourselves up in rules. We tie ourselves in knots, trying to keep all sorts of laws, written and unwritten. We just get stuck on rule keeping. We want clear boundaries around us. Maybe we're this tendency we have to look down our nose at other people. The rules that the Pharisees had for sacrifice were almost unending in their detail. It was just incredible. You think about bureaucracy today. Think about anybody who puts on a fluorescent jacket and tells you can't stand there. The list of rules was just incredible. And so when Jesus talks about sacrifice here, it's all of that rule-keeping, boundary stuff, keeping people out stuff. We see it in the separatists, we see it in the Pharisees, we see it in the way us good British people care deeply about the proper functioning of the queue. We see it more recently in cancel culture, where, if you say or think the wrong thing, then you're dead to me, you have nothing more to say to me, there's nothing of value you can bring to the world. It's all the same, this kind of clear rules, clear boundaries, keeping people away, keeping ourselves pure. We like boundaries and division. We like putting clear water between us and those people who aren't like us. Maybe we like people who are doing wrong things or we think are doing wrong things to know that we know they're doing wrong things. We don't want to be tainted by the wrong things that they do. But Jesus is different. Jesus says what matters more than your rules and your boundaries is mercy. What does mercy mean? Well, mercy means as much as we might want to judge someone else, our priority is to give them grace. As much as we might want to lay down the law, our priority is to offer forgiveness. As much as we might want to cancel someone else for what they think or what they've said, our priority is to try to find a way to build relationship with them. As much as we might think that somebody has no value, our priority is to see their potential. Actually, not even just their potential. Our priority is to learn to see the gifts that they are to us now. Mercy trumps rule keeping. That's the point of what Jesus is saying there. Mercy is more important than rule keeping. And I suspect most of us at a gut level, we know that's true. At a gut level, we know that mercy is more important than rule keeping. Because if life is all about rules, then probably we know we're not going to make the grade. If life is all about being judged by someone else's standard, then we know they're likely to find holes in who we are and what we've done. If life is about this internal tick sheet that we need to mark ourselves against, if we're honest, we know we're probably going to be disappointed with ourselves. You know, how many of us haven't fallen short of some kind of social more? How many of us haven't used the wrong words or thought the wrong things? How many of us feel like we're always cool enough or smart enough for everybody else? How many of us always meet our own expectations? And this morning, if any of that resonates with you, hear the other two things that Jesus says. He says, I've come not for the people who think they are whole and healthy. I've come not for the people who convince they've got it all together, that they're totally in the right. You see, in Jesus, we find God giving himself not for the people who've proved they're doing fine, but for the people who still know they need mercy and grace and forgiveness. In Jesus, we find God not giving himself away for some trendy in-group, but for those who know they need mercy most of all. And do you know, it seems to me that perhaps Jesus doesn't have very much of value to give to those who've spent their lives marking their own homework. But Jesus has so much more than we can imagine for those who know that they need grace. Really, that's the gift that Christianity brings to the world, or should bring to the world. We don't always get it right. Sometimes it feels we don't often get it right. The gift that we bring to the world is this practice of forgiveness, of not holding somebody's past against them, of allowing them a fresh start. You know, if we claim to be like Jesus, then we will be marked with these things. We will be people of grace. We will be people of mercy. We will be people of welcome. We will be people who include others. We'll be people who transgress the divisions that society's put around us, who break down those barriers and reach out in friendship, who seek community. We'll be people who look past other people's sin and see in them the potential that they have in God. We'll be like Jesus, who broke those social codes again and again to form community. Jesus, who invites us to do the same. We'll be people who ignore the rules, who ignore the boundaries, because mercy matters more. I mean, that could change the world, couldn't it, if we actually lived that stuff? That's partly why I find Jesus so deeply compelling still, and so challenging. Let me say one more thing before I finish. That girl I talked about in my primary school, I told you that she was always noisy and laughing, dancing. And she's very vibrant. And yet we ignored her. I ignored her. And I think about myself in that primary school. I was quite worried about fitting in. I was worried about saying the wrong thing. I was worried about doing the wrong thing. I didn't want to be different from anybody else. And then there comes into my school this girl who is just free to be herself. And on reflection now, I think what a gift she was. If only I could have received the gift. How much more full my life would have been if I would have learned from her. It doesn't really matter that much what other people think. Just be yourself. Just go with the joy. Just find life wherever it is. And you know, the same with Matthew, the tax collector. Matthew sat there at his desk. Maybe Jesus spotted him with his pen and his paper, whatever he had, because he thought, I'm going to need somebody to write this stuff down. Because that Matthew, the tax collector, is the Matthew that the gospel book we heard from is named after. Some of his memories were written down and formed this gospel that we're still reading this morning, this book of stories about Jesus that brings us so much comfort in different ways and has done over many years. That was the gift of the tax collector, the one who had nothing to offer to the world, who Jesus welcomed and embraced and brought so much. If we're brave enough to follow Jesus in offering grace, even to those we had thought were unworthy, maybe we will actually find more life and more grace as we do that. Maybe as we reach out to those who are different from us, we actually find life becomes more full. Because maybe God is putting together a party of mercy and grace and forgiveness. And maybe he's inviting anybody who knows they need help, including me and including you. Amen. Maybe as we just think about how that affects us this week, maybe just consider who might you exclude this week? And could you do that differently? Or are there ways in which you're missing life because you've made yourself separate? What could you do differently about that this week? Or maybe is God provoking you this morning to seek community, seek friendship with somebody new? Maybe there's somebody springs to mind now. Or maybe a different question. Are you being honest about the help that you need right now? And if so, where are you going to get that help? Who can you get it from? And finally, if mercy trumps rule keeping, maybe there's a few of us, the thing we need to know this morning is to be a bit kinder to ourselves this week. Show a bit more grace to ourselves. Sarah.